Just when you thought the discourse over the Karmelo Anthony case couldn't get more unhinged, the geniuses over at The View weigh in. Hey guys, welcome back to the podcast for a solo episode where we're going to do something we actually haven't done in a minute, and that's check in with the lovely ladies of The View, ABC's news division program. Always worth keeping in mind. It is actually unironically part of ABC News' news division, where these brilliant and insightful women gather to dispense their wisdom to millions of Americans who, for one reason or another, do decide to tune in. And it's often funny, it's often just absurd, but it was actually very disturbing to watch their coverage of the Karmelo Anthony verdict after he was found guilty of murder for stabbing Austin Metcalf in the heart, who of course tragically died. I talked about this case actually in great length and how lots of people were saying lots of incorrect things about it. There was a lot of misinformation, a lot of very toxic racial discourse and tension injected into it that is not actually found in the events that unfolded or the evidence or testimony that was brought. And I went through it all, I believe, fairly, but the lovely ladies of The View have decided to get around to the topic, and they did such a terrible job just butchering basic facts, race baiting about the whole situation, that I think it needs to be called out. So we're going to go through that on today's show. Buckle up and brace yourself for some stupidity, and let's turn on the segment.
Welcome back. This story we've been following this, and so now there's new footage that has been released of the moments after high schooler Karmelo Anthony fatally stabbed Austin Metcalf at a Texas track meet in April of 2025. Take a look.
I'm not alleged. Okay.
He put his hands on me. I told him not to. He put his hands on me.
Guys, I'll just pause and say that the reason this story is back in the news is because of this footage that was released that shows Karmelo running away and then crying, admitted he did it, saying he put his hands on him. And obviously the footage is newsworthy, but I don't really think it tells us anything new that wasn't already established in the facts of the case. The fact that he ran away from the scene of a physical altercation where he just stabbed someone doesn't necessarily answer the question. It doesn't prove it wasn't self-defense or anything like that. And the fact that he said he did it and that it wasn't alleged and that he said he put his hands on it, all of this is just like things that were established in the trial. So beyond the kind of shock value of it, I don't think the footage changes a whole lot. That just now that it's been released to the public. It was, of course, part of the trial and the jury saw it.
He was sentenced to 35 years in prison, which he's appealing. The case has a lot of people divided. Some people believe that race was a factor in the trial because there were no black jurors. They were all the three black jurors that were there were educators, and they were released.
They were struck.
For that. And
oh my God, it's just comical hearing Whoopi Goldberg trying to set this story up and just so clearly being so utterly unfamiliar with how a trial works or how jury selection unfolds or anything like that. Maybe you shouldn't cover topics you have no understanding of. Crazy take, I know.
And some folks think, no, he got a fair trial. But is this a jury of his peers?
I don't think
Yes.
so. And you know,
What?
This has been an issue for such a long time in the judicial system where prosecutors use what are called, Batson challenges. And they
Explain what that is.
It's a challenge that is used to strike a juror, generally a juror of color, for a race-neutral reason.
Right.
Because you're not supposed to.
not
You're supposed to have a jury of your peers. And
So there's already so much wrong here. First off, these kinds of challenges are not used just primarily for jurors of color. They're used in general to remove people from the jury pool who have some sort of conflict or not totally unrelated reason other than race that they should not be a juror. So in this case, it was because they're educators and they're clearly kind of at a school situation involving students. It's a little close to home for them. You want people who can be totally dispassionate. And they keep saying this, that there were no black jurors. I mean, there's no that doesn't make it not a jury of your peers. All that means is a jury of other citizens, right? It doesn't have to exactly reflect some demographic exact hierarchy of the population or anything like that. Same way, if I'm a gay person, if I committed a crime, I wouldn't have some right to have another gay guy on the impaneled jury. Like, that's just not a thing. That's not a requirement to have a legitimate legal jury outcome, that it has to meet some sort of threshold of identity representation. And they're omitting the fact as well, of course, that there were multiple non-white jurors. It wasn't all white jury, as many people have claimed, but also even then, that doesn't matter. Unless there's some evidence of racial discrimination or animus in the jury process or something like that, which there isn't. It, again, does not have to have a cookie cutter matching. That doesn't make it not a jury of your peers. And you can't cast doubt on a jury outcome, or I guess you can, but it's just very reckless and irresponsible to do so based off this total misunderstanding that isn't a thing. You don't have a right to this. So to frame it like your right was violated when there is no right to it is totally wrong. I don't know. USA is killing it in the World Cup, but just how far could they actually go? If you ask me, I doubt they'll actually win it, but I think they could make a run, and apparently a lot of people agree. According to our channel partners at Kalshi, 30% of people think the US could make the quarterfinals, the final 8, while 25% of people think they'll be eliminated after the round of 32. Following the World Cup, I'm loving it to have everybody paying attention to soccer for once in America, and if you're enjoying it as well, there's really no better way to follow along with the action than with the Kalshi app. You can see the markets adjust in real time. Kalshi is the first CFTC-regulated exchange dedicated to predicting the outcome of future events, including soccer matches or football matches. And if you sign up today, just get the app on your phone or head to Kalshi's website and use code BRADP. You'll get $20 when you trade $20 today. Now back to the show.
Your peers, and you're not supposed to just strike someone because they're black. And in this case, they gave the reasoning that they're educators and this happened, these were high school students, and this happened at a school track meet, so they couldn't be impartial because of that.
Okay, yeah, that's actually normal. The same way that, for example, if there's a police officer involved shooting that the trial is about, and they'll ask the jurors, like, do you have any family who are police? Right? Because if you have some sort of personal connection, and if they say yes, they'll often be removed for cause in the same way. That's about eliminating bias. It has nothing to do with them being black or not. It's about whether they have a connection that would affect them or make them partial in some way about the situation. Like being a teacher, obviously, you're going to have an emotional connection to students and in something happening on school grounds. The same way if somebody has, a personal tie to law enforcement or some other thing, that's just a normal part of the jury selection process. But because of the race baiting furor that has erupted around this case, they're just baselessly casting doubt on what's a very clear and substantiated jury verdict. Sorry, not sorry. And I think that's reckless, but can't say I'm particularly surprised.
I don't think that's an appropriate reason.
The best ones too.
Yeah, I don't think it's an appropriate reason to strike black jurors, especially when it's a young black teenager on trial, and especially when that particular area is made up of 10% of an African-American community. So I don't think he got a jury of his peers. So I think on appeal, there is a legitimate thing.
Yeah, it's just embarrassing that she says stuff like this as somebody with a law degree who was once actually a criminal lawyer, I believe. And that's not a basis for appeal. That's not going to be a basis for, I guess it's a basis for appeal in that you can appeal, but not a likely to succeed one based on the widespread commentary I've seen from actual legal experts who aren't daytime TV hosts. But I don't know. Sonny Austin says otherwise. And again, it's absolutely a jury of your peers, whether or not it has a token black person on it or not. That isn't a thing.
A legitimate reason. I also think we have to look at self-defense here because there seems to be two systems of justice at play in this country.
So we have to look at self-defense here as if that wasn't what the entire trial was about. That they literally presented evidence and arguments and counter-arguments about whether this was self-defense, and the jury concluded that it was not. So they have considered self-defense, Sonny. And I don't know, I would just humbly suggest that the people who aren't, partisan political ideologues or aren't people very involved in racial politics in America, but are just everyday citizens, yes, a jury of his peers, who sat there and listened to the testimony and arguments from both sides and reached a conclusion, probably have a better hot take than you, who have just watched clips about this on social media or skimmed headlines about it. I don't know. That seems reasonable to me, because the self-defense claim was considered and rejected, in part because you can't respond. You can only respond with lethal force if you're facing lethal force of some kind, right? And so if there's some sort of physical altercation with somebody and you're pushing them, or they push you and you stab them in the heart with a knife, that's not proportional self-defense. So the jury rejected the argument, but it was considered, as much as Sonny doesn't like the conclusion they reached.
Country. And there have been for a very long time. I was part of the system, so I understand that, and I believe that to be true. In this case, this young man, you heard him say he put his hands on me, and I told him not to. The kid that died, and I have so much empathy for him and his family's loss. That kid was 200 pounds. This kid was 130 pounds. And so, and the other kid was also taller than he is. He was the only black kid under the tent.
Well, that's not true. So there were other black kids who were under the tent, and there were many of the teammates from Austin Metcalf's track team who testified and offered testimony that supported the prosecution were actually black, were not white. So the idea that it was all just a bunch of white people ganged up on this black kid is nonsense. And then I'm not going to say that it is irrelevant that there's some physical disparity between the two, but you're not allowed to use a knife against someone who pushes you just because he's bigger than you. Unless there was some sort of the pushing or whatever altercation ensued, there has to actually be something a reasonable person would interpret as like a threat to your life for you to go and use lethal force against somebody in the name of self-defense. And there wasn't. So a push from a big person a person that's bigger than you doesn't change the fact just because they're tall or they're broad or what have you. I mean, it just doesn't. But they harp on this over and over again, the people who are trying to cast doubt on this verdict, of course.
Under the tent. And the victim here had his twin brother with him, who was also a very large person. If you don't fear for your life, if you weigh 130 pounds, I weigh 130 pounds. Facing somebody that's 200 pounds, I would be terrified of that. So I don't understand why self-defense was rejected by this jury.
I agree with a lot of what you're saying, especially the jury
So the reason it was rejected was because they found it wasn't reasonable for him to fear for his life and use lethal force. And because he potentially instigated the whole interaction as well. So it's like they analyzed this very closely and dismissed it. And she seems to just be like, well, have they thought about the fact that it could have been self-defense? Yes, Sonny, they did. And then we'll get to what Alyssa Farrah Griffin says here, but I was slightly surprised by the angle she took with it, because she, of course, has a Republican conservative background and yet seem to largely agree with Sonny.
Representation, that's what stood out to me. And we know there's plenty of evidence that there's sentencing disparity with people of color. The one thing to me, though, is what is the fair sentence when you take a life? And this is what I'm struggling with, because this is a tragedy across the board. A 17-year-old is dead. A 17-year-old's going to likely spend 35 years in jail. He could appeal at 17. Yeah. I'd be curious what you think, because I wrestle with it. If it was, God forbid, anyone in my life, I would think 30 years seems about right. If they said life, I'd say that's too long for a 17-year-old. He could be rehabilitated.
Look, I think 35 years, if there is no self-defense claim, which is an absolute claim to this crime, absolute defense, I think that would be appropriate.
Yeah, so this is an interesting point, because I've seen some conservatives or just people who are very anti Karmelo Anthony in this case, which of course I do believe that he's guilty and was held accountable and that's right, say that he should be thrown away for life, right? Like he should be locked up for life. He took a life, and so he should spend the rest of his days in jail with no release. And I'm not sure I agree with that, or that I think that's practical or realistic. You'd need to look at what is the norm for some kind of case that is similar to this, and does his sentence match with that? Because I'm not sure I believe that it make sense necessarily to sentence someone for all of their entire life with no chance of ever getting out or rehabilitation because of an incident like this, where clearly he was reckless, clearly he was violent, clearly he broke the law to me, clearly he murdered someone, but it's not like he's a serial killer who stalked someone with the intent of killing them. No, he was a very foolish and very aggressive young man who made a terrible decision and escalated the situation with lethal force. But I'm not sure that he is somebody with 0% chance of ever being rehabilitated. And more importantly, it's just about what's the standard. And I don't believe that it is standard in a case like this to send somebody to life without parole. Right. I don't believe that's the case. So I don't see why, just because there's inflamed passions about this case, there'd be some sort of unusual harsh sentencing. I think you should get what is the typical sentence for a crime like this. And as far as I can tell, it is a somewhat normal sentencing outcome, but they'll have the chance to dispute it or litigate it or seek enhancements on appeal, of course. So.
But if you look at other cases, there was the other case where there was a young black kid who was chased by Rick Chow, a store owner, accused of taking water bottles, which he didn't take, the 4 water bottles. He chased that young boy 130 yards, which is half of a football field, and shot him in the back, claiming self-defense. And you know where he is right now? He's at home with his family because he was found not guilty.
Yeah, and there's a lot of cases like that.
If that is self-defense, I don't understand why this isn't.
But when the system fails one time, I don't think we should then say, so then the system should fail.
But they're very similar self-defense.
They're actually not similar self-defense cases at all, and the details of that case are totally different. But Alyssa Farah-Griffin is correct here that if you found another outcome where a person who committed a murder was unjustly let off on a self-defense defense, that's not a reason to let more people off the hook for what's not a legitimate self-defense. Like, 2 wrongs don't make a right. Just because in a system where thousands upon thousands of murder trials have taken place, you can find a specific one where justice wasn't done, doesn't mean that somehow this case should also not have like the correct outcome. It's a very silly argument. And then, of course, shocker, she is not describing this accurately. This case, which is, again, a complicated case that was heard and considered by a jury. I don't know it super well, but that teenager, the young black boy, had a gun and at one point pointed it at the store owner and threatened him. So it's a very different situation. And then he was shot after this scuffle and this chase that ensued. And I wasn't in the jury room. I didn't hear all the arguments. But to try to claim that it's some sort of apples to apples situation to this, it's absolutely not the case. And it's just very disingenuous and low information, in my view, at least. But that makes it pretty typical for The View. So let's keep going here.
Well, Sonny, I had a question because I was wondering why the self-defense claim didn't work. And I had read that it said you have to use the same amount of force that was brought against you. So if someone pushes you and you push them back, that's self-defense?
That's not the standard because it's not only use, but attempted use.
Well, that's what I'm asking.
So if you felt your life was in danger and you felt he was going to do more than just push you, and you weigh 130 pounds, and you're outweighed by 70 pounds.
So you can use.
So, okay, the problem with this is that it has to be a reasonable fear that your life is in danger, and the jury looked at the facts and the testimony about what Austin Metcalf had done, whether it was a push or what have you, and found that he wasn't in reasonable fear of there was no reasonable fear to be had justified based on those facts that his life was in danger. So then you can't cite self-defense. I don't know what to tell you. That there wasn't a reasonable fear. It's not just, oh, if you feel a fear, then you can do whatever you want. That's not a workable framework, and it's not the framework for self-defense. So
when I looked at this case, though, which to me is just sad every which way. Right? There's two families that are destroyed. There's Austin Metcalf lost his life. Karmelo Anthony is going to spend at least 17 years in jail. So this is just tragic. But my question is, how did this get to this point, and where the hell were the adults?
Yeah.
These were 2 17-year-olds.
Yeah.
I mean,
what I understand is, it is normal for runners to go under tents.
My kid.
Yeah, it is normal to go under tents. I think he was in the tent for a different school or whatever, but I think we can all agree this is a situation that should never have escalated like this. But it probably also wouldn't have if Austin, or rather if Karmelo Anthony hadn't broken school policies to bring a knife with him to a track meet, which isn't the craziest thing in the world. Apparently, people do use knives for different purposes in track, like with their equipment and stuff. But I get what they're saying about like where were the adults, but also at an event like this, a multi-hour outdoor track meet where you've got hundreds of kids and a few coaches, it's like, and these are 17, 18-year-olds, you're not going to be supervising them every second super closely. There's not going to be an adult hovering over every conversation. And the entire confrontation probably lasted a minute or two. So it's not like, I'm not sure I blame the adults for not having observed them at all times and everywhere. We can't really, that's not realistic. So there's always going to be altercations between teenagers, and once in a blue moon, they can horribly escalate, and that's this kind of a situation. Now, one final point here I want to discuss where I do think Sunny Hostin raised, well, I don't necessarily agree with the conclusion she extrapolated from it, a legitimate complaint. But let's discuss. Listen to this.
My kids were runners. You always do that.
And so there was some conversation that he was told to leave, and he was saying,
well, he had been invited under the tent by a friend.
Yes.
He had been invited. One last thing, I know we're playing the music, but Austin Metcalf's the victim, the deceased. His father went on a podcast, and listen to it for yourself, but he called Karmelo Anthony a racial slur, and he also said that the reason that black people weren't on the jury is because black people are unable to hold bias from the trial because they don't know their own fathers, have a bunch of baby mamas running around living off of government assistance. So that is the thing. That's the thinking of the victim's father.
Well, let's not say that was the victim's
I'm not saying
thinking
it was the
as well.
Of the victim.
Good.
But of the victim's father.
And we'll let you sit with that. We'll be right back.
So there you go. On that last point, I have a lot of sympathy for the Metcalf family. Obviously, they've been the victims of a horrific crime. They've also just faced an unimaginable onslaught of hatred and vitriol and threats, I'm sure, and I'm certainly not suggesting that this is like a lot of black people, but certain segments of black media or black Twitter have like made these people the villains and harassed them. And I'm sure also some like allies and woke white people have as well. And so I think what Austin Metcalf's father said in that podcast is really gross and unfortunately is racist. Some of the things he says, absolutely. And it cedes the moral high ground a little bit. I think it's a shame just because it's wrong to say those kinds of things. But also, I mean, they clearly were in the right here. And the actual case wasn't about race, right? There wasn't a racial motive here. There was no testimony about Austin Metcalf saying something racist during this incident. And so when the critics or the Karmelo supporters were saying they're all racist, it's racism during the trial and about the case, that was not true. But now after the fact, you go out there and say something that's pretty racist about it or about the person who killed your son and some of his supporters, you then allow people to backfill that even though that's not necessarily justified. So I think it's a really gross and unfortunate thing that he said. I mean, the defense that I'll offer for him, which isn't like a moral defense, it's just, can I understand this, is that he probably snapped, right? He has just seen waves of black people insult him and attack his family and mock his dead son. And that doesn't justify you engaging in racist behavior. That's always wrong. But it's like not shocking to me that somebody subjected to that would hit back, even in such an unfortunate and misguided way. And more importantly, it doesn't actually tell us anything about the facts of the case or really meaningfully cast doubt in any way on the verdict, at least not to me. I mean, imperfect people are victims all the time, and he wasn't even the victim. He wasn't even involved in the incident. He was somewhere miles away when it all happened. So he could be the sweetest guy ever or a total racist. It really would have no bearing on the facts of what happened at that track meet. And the jury concluded that it was murder. And I'm sorry, but the ladies of The View don't like that. They should try to understand the case more and not just cast doubt on it baselessly and stir up racial tensions. But what else would you expect from these folks? I don't know. At this point, can't say I'm surprised. That's just my take. Y'all will have to let me know what you think in the comments below. Make sure you're subscribed if you aren't yet. Do hit the like button and all of that. And we'll be back with more real soon.